Good. I knew it was going to be snowy and cold today because I put my summer tires on yesterday. So anyway, welcome to our 27th celebration of research. This is a big one for us, simply because it is so big. We've had more people register for this one than anyone else, and this is the first time that we're using the Legion as a venue, and we hope it suits your needs. So my name is Andy Gordon. I'm the director of ULinks. Many of you will know all about ULinks, but ULinks is essentially a very small, not-for-profit charitable organization that works in Haliburton County. We're essentially research brokers, so we listen to you, the community, and help you diagnose your problems, and then we reach out to the brightest, smartest undergraduate students we can, principally from Trent University, but a few other academic institutions as well. And they come up to Haliburton County, they solve your problem 99% of the time, and they get a really good experiential learning experience in the process.
In the fall of 1999, a group of local citizens, with the support of Professors John Wadland and Tom Willens, who's here today, created ULinks, Center for Community-Based Research, to inspire and facilitate research where the ideas came from the community. And we created ULinks as part of the Haliburton County Community Cooperative, which had been formed in 1998. And its focus was on the economic, social, cultural, and environmental well-being of Haliburton County.
Haliburton County, they know a lot about it, right? They always say, what is so unique about Haliburton County? Tell me more about your riding. Well, aside from the nature, the rivers, the lakes, the boutique shopping, the amazing restaurants, and so many other things, the list goes on, it also has a unique ability to solve local problems with local people. For a whole bunch of reasons. You know, we have great service agencies going on here. There's also agencies that may not be located here, but they have jurisdiction, but there's always that ability to solve problems. And we do that not only because of local impact, and I'm talking about locals, 80 years plus that have been here. I'm pretty sure I'm lowering the bar a bit, but also we have a lot of people coming from outside the Haliburton County that are calling this place home with amazing backgrounds, a wealth of knowledge, but they want to give back. So we have people willing to step up and help solve problems because there are a lot of questions, but we also have agencies like ULinks that put these partnerships together, that do a lot of the research, and we have amazing young people here behind us that are ready to dig in and have dug in and giving us a bit more information so we can form our decisions and then make those local solutions possible. But it's all part of a team, a community effort, so thank you everyone for being here, putting this platform possible, making it possible, and to everyone who played a part organizing, this is fantastic. Keep up the great work.
I haven't seen him for a long time.
A long time.
But Bernie was a teacher in Haliburton and decided that she wanted to take a course. And so she came down to the university and took this bioregional course. And when we started talking about how students interact with communities, she right off the bat said, well, no, you haven't really thought this through. She was right. She said there's a sort of an ethical protocol that you have to go through for working with community members, and there are ways of sort of recognizing the power that people have who live in the community to direct these projects, and they should be paid attention to it.
I remember it was in the first week or two, Tom Willens bundled me up into his minivan and brought me up here. So right from the outset, he made sure that I understood the importance of the relationship with the Haliburton community, with ULinks, and I've been delighted to attend this celebration a number of times and to help facilitate the really good work that is going on here. So I'm just here to acknowledge and to thank everybody for that, and to speak about the importance of this work. For students, experiential learning through these kinds of projects can be very transformative. And it is not just about receiving a question from the community and getting to work on the answers. It is very much a knowledge exchange, and that's something that we really believe in. It is a reciprocal exchange of knowledge and insights, and that information, that knowledge flows both ways. What we have learned from students who undertake community-based research projects is that they might have been thinking of a corporate job, they might have had other threads and ideas in mind, and then they have the opportunity to come and work with local organizations, see the dedication of volunteers, get passionate about the community issues, and it can really change their trajectory, and they see the value of engaging with community, of the importance of not-for-profits, of municipalities, of the organizations that grow based around these issues, but also around the passion of people to solve them and make the world a better place. That work is only made possible because of the faculty and the staff who are dedicated. It adds extra time and effort to do work up here, and so it is fueled by faculty who really believe that the work that they do should be contributing to the community. And so again, having this broader sense of Haliburton being part of the Trent community is a really important thread here. And so I do want to specifically acknowledge and thank the faculty and staff who are here, and those who work behind the scenes and were able to make it today, for making that extra effort to really engage with this community and support students. And I would ask you to just join me in thanking them for that work.
This is a unique organization. If you're here and you're from Haliburton, take advantage of what we have here. If you have something that needs to be studied, if you have a problem, you can come to ULinks, and we hopefully will be able to set you up with some partners who have expertise and can provide you with the analysis or the study that is required to hopefully solve your problem.
My name's Elise Morgan, and I was working with Kate Crawford Thompson on artificial loon nesting platforms across 3 lakes in the Haliburton region. And the best thing about the community-based research project process for me was to be able to see the life cycle of the work. So from its first conception, the ideas, how we're going to implement it, to seeing the final deliverable and delivering it to our partners was incredible. And being able to feel like the work we do isn't just theoretical, but has a real impact on community members.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here today. As Frank said, I'm Kate Crawford Thompson.
And I'm Elise Morgan.
And we are student researchers at Trent University. And this past year, we had the incredible opportunity to partner with ULinks and the Halls and Hawks Lake Property Owners Association to complete a community-based research project on optimizing the design and placement of loon artificial nesting platforms.
So loons are an incredibly charismatic species and really a staple of northern lake life. Here in the Haliburton region, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the lakes are a part of the Trent Severn Waterway, which means that they are hydrologically controlled by Parks Canada, along with some municipalities. Loons are very poorly adapted to walking on land. I don't know if you've ever seen them walk. They look rather goofy. So with a hydrologically controlled waterway, those water level fluctuations can influence loons a lot, as if the water level drops too much, they're no longer able to access their nest, or if it raises too much, it may wash their nest out.
So So that's kind of where we came in. So the 3 lakes that we were working with was Big Hawk, Little Hawk, and Halls Lake. Maybe some of you are familiar with those areas around here. And cottagers were beginning to notice that there was generally a very high percentage of nest failures, which meant that loons were attempting to nest, but they weren't actually succeeding. And they attributed this to the fluctuating water levels. So as Ellie mentioned, water levels can drop by up to 9 feet depending on the season, or rise during high spring melt as well. So they came up with the idea that artificial nesting platforms might be a viable solution to this issue. But the problem is there's a lot of different designs out there and recommendations for how these platforms can be built and placed so that loons actually occupy them. So last year, the Halls and Hawks Lake Property Owners Association decided that they wanted to look into this issue of design of these platforms. So then they partnered with Ulinks, and then Ellie and I took on this project. So we had 3 primary goals of this. So first and foremost is that design component. So how can these platforms be designed to best mimic a natural nest site? What materials should you use? So even the type of wood can really impact the longevity of these platforms. And then additionally, the types of vegetation that you should be placing on top of them. Secondly was the placement consideration. So obviously loons are an aquatic bird, but that can mean a lot of different things. So are they frequenting streams or more lakes? Where are they wanting to nest? So we wanted to know where these platforms can be placed within these environments to best support breeding pairs. Finally, we wanted to know how these platforms could be managed on an ongoing basis so that our community members were actually able to track their success.
So we really started this project around last summer with some initial site visits. We wanted to get a feel for what these lakes were looking like and where we might have these platforms be placed, along with where loons were already nesting. During those site visits, we also had the opportunity to have some informal interviews with members of the Property Owners Association, and they let us in on some locations where loons had been seen, whether fishing, nesting, and even some locations of previously deployed platforms. We did this whole process with alongside a literature review. So we were looking a lot at Web of Science as well as Google Scholar to find out what research had been going on. And through that we found 5 key environmental factors and 5 key platform characteristics. So the platform characteristics that were really highlighted were the use of cedar logs. Cedar logs are naturally buoyant and rot resistant, and it was generally recommended to use some kind of mesh to support the vegetation on top of the platform, and the anchoring system was generally recommended to be made of chains and concrete blocks. As for the environmental characteristics, you want to place these nests in a sheltered bay. This helps minimize fetch or uninterrupted wind exposure over water. You also want to have emergent vegetation both on and off the nest, kind of matching the nest to whatever's around it so loons accept it. You also want high water clarity. Loons are amazing fishers. They're very adapted to that aquatic lifestyle, but to be able to see their prey, you got to be able to see into the water. And with that fetch part, as I mentioned, you really want to have it placed in a sheltered bay, as well as natural or artificial islands helps break up that wind flow. So for the life cycle of a platform and the general management of it, it really begins in the winter with building the platform and or maintaining it if it is your second year on this project. In the early spring, basically as soon as the ice melts, you want to deploy this platform. So loons will come in, do a little survey of the land, see where they might want to settle down, and the nest needs to be in the water for that so they have a better chance of choosing it. In April to July, you want to step back. You can monitor from afar, they're very territorial, and give them a lot of space. One way you can help ensure this is through things like boating regulations. In the fall, you want to pull the platform out of the water, much as you do your docks or your boats, just to prevent unnecessary weathering to the platform over winter. And then in the fall and winter, it's back to the drawing board. Strategize what worked, what didn't work, what changes might you want to make. It is important to note here that just because loons didn't nest the first year you put it out doesn't mean they won't. Loons are very smart creatures. If something is suddenly in their environment, they're going to be a little apprehensive and take some time to warm up to it.
So just to summarize some of the key takeaways that Ellie and I had from this. So first and foremost, just keeping an open mind and being flexible is so key to any project. As with any sort of project that includes this kind of research, you're bound to encounter obstacles, and we certainly did as well. So that just meant we had to keep an open mind and be flexible to ensure that we were still able to create the deliverables like that management protocol to our host organization. Another thing that we took away from this is that the old adage, like build it and they will come, does not always apply. So even if you are to create these platforms and deploy them, there's so much work that needs to go into them in order for them to actually be seen as a viable option. So just making sure you're going back and, as Ellie mentioned, continually looking to adapt this so that they can be successful on a long-term basis.
And with that long-term engagement really drives home the key message of community involvement is essential to this process. It's a very involved process, from taking it out of the water, building the platform, monitoring, and we truly couldn't have done this project, and this project truly is reliant on all of these community members that we've had the pleasure of working with. So the Halls and Hawk Lakes Property Owners Association, Frank, Autumn, Paul, Bruce, and Allison are all parts of this community that have made this project possible for us. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes.
I'm not sure if I missed it, but were there data to indicate the increased effectiveness or numbers of loons on the lake in your research review?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. One of the main issues we ran into during this project, as Kate touched on, is needing to be flexible, because there's not a lot of information on loon nesting platforms. So a lot of it was based off of recommendations from a variety of different sources to best suit the needs of these 3 lakes. Another part of it is loons are incredibly territorial. You only really want one breeding pair on any given lake. It was interesting because if you have a more aggressive loon, they will yodel more or have more yodels per vocalization, which is a sign of increased male loon aggression. So these platforms aren't really to increase the number of loons, but provide them with stable habitat in order for their nests to be successful in terms of hatching and reaching it to the fledging or flight stage. Kate, anything to add?
Just for the sake of time, we'll take that other question.
They need assistance, or nature not enough for them to nest? Sorry. Do the loons need assistance to populate, I guess? Is this why you're doing it?
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, exactly. So they do need assistance in these areas. So as we talked about, in areas that are hydrologically controlled, there's significant water fluctuations which can wash out natural nests that are attached to maybe a bank of a lake or something like that. So if the water levels are to rise up, that can flood out the nest, and if they drop too quickly, that means that the loon is no longer able to access it, even if it has already laid eggs. So these platforms provide that sort of alternative that can rise up and down with the natural and artificial fluctuations of waters, which has been shown to increase nest success significantly. In one study we looked at, by deploying artificial nesting platforms, nest success, which is measured by like the amount of fledglings that actually leave the nest, increased from 0% to 67% on a lake.
How many fledglings did they produce?
Typically between 1 to 2 eggs. Again, predation can impact that. Sometimes one might fall victim of like an eagle or an osprey, which is oftentimes something to watch out for.
One last question. What's the typical cost of these platforms?
The typical cost depends a lot on what you already have access to. I'm a big fan of recycling, reduce, reuse, recycle, as well as using a lot of things these cottagers already have. So when we were looking at the anatomy of a platform, you want to use cedar logs if possible, because they're naturally rot resistant and buoyant. But you're taking a lot of the shoreline vegetation from the surrounding shoreline and putting it on there, as well as chicken wire. The main cost comes from the chains and the concrete blocks for the anchoring system.
Thank you.
For sure.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
My name is Laura Scribner, and I did my community-based research project in partnership with ULinks, Trent University, Kalara Station, and Rebel Elixir. So just a little bit about our community partners. Kalara Station is a small-scale farm, dog breeder, and animal boarding business. And the farm prioritizes fresh, local ingredients. And they wanted me to let you know that this year they will have leeks, asparagus, baby greens, tomatoes, and squash available for pickup at the farm, as well as at some local farmers markets. And you can also get coffee, teas, and other wonderful beverages on site, supplied by Rebel Elixir, which is where Rebel Elixir's coffee roaster is located. And they have a vision to build a greenhouse to supply fresh local produce to Haliburton County all year round. And in the top picture, you can see community partner Susan Peel with her pet emu. And here is a map of approximately where Kalara Station is located. So the challenge. Many of you may know that fully a quarter of children in Haliburton County are living below the poverty line and are therefore also food insecure. And I don't have to tell you, as it snows outside today, that we cannot grow food outside all year round in Haliburton. And traditional commercial greenhouses, as we know, do require a lot of energy for heating and light. And finally, Canada, we participate in a globalized food system, which is very vulnerable to things like tariff wars, geopolitical conflict, and climate change. So just briefly, some site-specific considerations and challenges. Kalara is situated, or appears to be situated, on a glacial deposit, which means that the bedrock is further down, which is another way of saying that there is more topsoil where Kalara is situated than elsewhere in the county. We know that that topsoil tends to be sandy, and the site does enjoy a south-facing slope close to the home. It's also worth mentioning that there is a wetland across the street. So, four-season growing in greenhouses can be complicated. Traditional greenhouses do use heaters as well as grow lights, and those heaters are often powered by propane or sometimes wood pellets. Out west in Alberta, they often use passive solar greenhouses because Alberta enjoys a lot more sunny days in the winter than we experience in Haliburton County. If you take a look at my graph here, you can see that in January, February, November, and December, you're looking at cloud cover on more than 60% of the days. And passive solar greenhouses are solar batteries, which means that they need the heat from the sun, which they absorb through a couple of mechanisms that I will be discussing. So they absorb the heat from the sun, and then they radiate that heat back out at night. However, underground, below the frost line, which in Haliburton is 1 to 2 meters, the temperature is a stable 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. So I looked at 2 different geothermal type systems that you could use to heat a greenhouse or your house. The first is called a ground air heat transfer system. And ground air heat transfer systems are a kind of climate battery. So using a fan system, they pump hot air that has been heated by the sun underground during the day, and then they use the same fan system to blow that heat back out into the greenhouse at night. Ground source heat pumps are a little more complicated to explain, but basically they use a water antifreeze combo that runs through those coils of pipes underground, and it picks up heat, and it actually gets slightly hotter than that 8 to 10 degrees Celsius that I described, and then it comes up, and at the heat exchanger, it comes into contact with a refrigerant, and refrigerant has a much higher or lower boiling point than water, so that refrigerant starts to boil, and then it goes into the compressor where the gas is compressed, which further heats it, and then that hot gas can run through like a hot water tank or a system to heat the air that then gets pumped out into the greenhouse. And while this is more complicated, it is substantially more energy efficient than heating your greenhouse with propane or a wood burning stove. So for my recommendations, I did recommend a ground source heat pump because it can maintain a steady temperature and it is not reliant on the sun the way that a ground air heat transfer system is. And as we discussed, Haliburton does experience a great deal of cloud cover. But we can still create a climate battery in this greenhouse with an absorbent northern wall that could be made out of a variety of materials so long as they are dense and they hold heat. So some options would be concrete, stone, or barrels painted black that are full of water. Additionally, I do recommend partially burying the greenhouse into the side of the hill. This is something that the community partners were very interested in, and it helps to further insulate the greenhouse without compromising on sunlight. And I do recommend that construction occur as close to the house as possible to facilitate ease of access and so that our community partners can just hook up the water and power from the house. And then finally, as discussed, not a lot of sun in the winter in Haliburton, so I do recommend LED full spectrum grow lights to give our community partners the flexibility that they need to grow what they want. So Kelowna Station and Rebel Elixir do already have established distribution channels at local grocery stores, restaurants, local farmers markets, and of course customers who are willing to make the scenic drive to the farm. And there are local restaurants who have expressed an interest in getting items like microgreens grown locally. And finally, there is a lack of commercial greenhouses in the area that are able to meet this kind of demand in the winter, so I think that they would do quite well. Here are my crop recommendations. I'm just going to go through them very quickly to leave time for questions, but in the spring, I would obviously emphasize growing seedlings in the greenhouse, get those things like tomatoes, peppers, and squashes started in there. Grow as much of those in the greenhouse as you can so that they can get started early. In the fall, I would still plant fall-loving crops because that will further help with season extension. And then in the winter, you can grow things like microgreens, herbs, green onions, and leafy greens to really utilize the space well and get lots of nutritious food. That's it. Thank you all for your attention. Any questions?
We'll have time for 2 questions.
Laura, did you look at using a ductless heat pump system using the air rather than ground source?
I did not look at that because my community partner specifically mentioned geothermal as being what they were interested in. I have briefly looked at that out of my own curiosity. I think it's a little bit less energy efficient in the long run, but I think it's a very cool system, and I think it works maybe better in a home than it would in a greenhouse, because greenhouses are inherently less insulated because you need a transparent material.
My job easy for me. Laura, did you research the possibility of using wetlands as your geothermal source because there's rotting vegetation producing heat?
Oh, not in that sense. No, I looked at it in the sense that running geothermal pipes through water is actually slightly more energy efficient than running it through the ground. That is a very interesting possibility, and given that farmers are harvesting methane to heat their infrastructure, I think that that's certainly possible, but I haven't looked into it at all. Okay, thank you all.
My name's Sam Winterbottom. I'm a 5th year Environment and Resource Science student at Trent, and my community-based research project was an assessment of carbon stocks in the Haliburton Highlands. And I think they've all made some pretty good points. I gotta say my favorite aspect of this project was probably just being able to take research that I do throughout the year and see a direct application at the end of it. It's just really nice to see it go straight out into the world and live beyond a paper at the end of a class.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you for coming out to the Celebration of Research today. So, like Frank said, my project was to undertake a carbon stock assessment for the Haliburton Highland Land Trust. A little bit of context on why we undertook this project, who the Haliburton Highland Land Trust is, and potential benefits from undertaking this process. So, the Haliburton Highland Land Trust currently manages 7 properties in Haliburton County, totaling about 7 square kilometers of land area. They are a nonprofit that focuses on community education, expansion of their conservation, and conservation projects in their existing properties. A little bit of background on carbon and why we want to assess its quantities or its density in the land trust's properties. Carbon is a critical ingredient in carbon dioxide, which is our primary concern in the global climate crisis. It's the climate forcer, and it increases the temperature of the atmosphere and changes our climate and our weather patterns. As far as this project's concerned, carbon stored in an ecosystem is carbon that is not stored in our atmosphere. Different ecosystems store carbon at different rates. As you can see on our figure here, you have deserts, which don't have a lot of biological activity, don't have a lot of carbon storage, compared to wetlands, which have enormous amounts of carbon storage and the potential to release that if they're disturbed. So the reasons we keep stock, the reasons we want to undertake a carbon stock assessment are the significant climate considerations in undertaking a carbon stock assessment for the land trust, the opportunity for the land trust to communicate its global climate efforts to its local community, and the opportunity to potentially seek enhanced conservation support from the federal government or improved revenue streams. So what were our actual objectives with this project? Well, there were 4 primary objectives that myself and the Land Trust identified, and those were our previous methods of carbon stock assessment viable for the Haliburton Highland Land Trust. So several organizations, specifically Ontario Nature, have produced documents in the past that lay out how to assess carbon in an ecosystem. Our goal was to see if those were applicable to the land trust. Further, if they are, how can we tune those to the specific circumstances of Haliburton County? What are the specific needs and goals of the land trust? Furthermore, if we undertake a carbon stock assessment of the land trust properties, what are the results? What are our findings? And finally, what benefits can the land trust derive from this process? Well, our methodology was simple, but it wasn't linear. I started with partner consultation, which was determining the land trust's staffing, their financial abilities, and their objectives with this process. Then I moved into a literature review to determine the baseline carbon stocks in Haliburton County and what to expect out of a carbon stock assessment process. Moving on from that, I developed a carbon stock assessment guide and framework for the land trust. I have a copy of it here. The contents are basically a layout of the whole process of carbon stock assessment, start to finish, highly accessible by people even with little background in this field. And it's meant to serve as information capital for the land trust going into the future. Further, I undertook an initial carbon stock assessment for the land trust. This involved assessing and estimating the carbon that's stored in their properties and comparing the density of carbon that we project in their properties to the land cover and ecosystem types in their properties. So, as I said, our first deliverable was the framework and guide. This is meant to be a reflective piece of literature for the land trust, something that they can go back to again and again in different projects or in their own internal uses to support carbon stock assessment activities. And the second big deliverable from this project was an initial carbon stock assessment of the land trust properties. And the carbon that we project in their properties is big. The mass of carbon projected in the land trust's 6 properties from 2025, they've acquired one since then, would outweigh the population of Toronto in terms of mass, and that's just in 6 square kilometers of land area. The potential carbon impact of conservation in Haliburton region is huge. The initial CSA involved the profiling of each property individually, so all 6 of them, and as I said before, the comparison of carbon density that we were projecting in each property to land cover type in the area. So here is an excellent example of this comparison. This is the Fred and Pearl Berry Wetland Complex, and as the name suggests, it is primarily a wetland property. It actually contains 4 different types of wetlands. It has bogs, fens, marshes, and swamps. And comparing the layout of these different wetland types to the density of carbon in the property, it can be observed that there's very, very high overlap between the distribution of fens and bogs and the location of projected high carbon areas. Similarly, areas of the property that are void of wetlands are also projected to have very low carbon storage. This is expected from our literature review. Fens and bogs overlie peat often, and peat is a precursor to coal and oil in a very long geological time frame. So this is a very good indication for the accuracy of the tool that we were using for this assessment. So big takeaways for this project included that Ontario Nature's framework is broadly applicable to the land trust, almost too broadly. It's a very, very widely applicable document, and that necessitated paring it back to make it more useful in the context of Haliburton County. Further, the initial carbon stock assessment revealed that the land trust operates in a variety of properties and holds a diverse amount of carbon across its different properties. Their Dow Forest property, which some of you may be familiar with, is their highest carbon property by far. Some next steps for this project, there is room for development. The Haliburton Highland Land Trust would be well advised to pursue a more intensive carbon stock assessment. The carbon stock assessment I undertook for this project was very initial, and it operated at a resolution of 250 meters by 250 meters. Some carbon stock assessment tools get as detailed as 30 meters by 30 meters, and this can offer enhanced resolution and a better picture of the carbon being stored in your ecosystem. Furthermore, the Land Trust should look into developing a field validation method for their carbon stock assessments. This might be a good place for further collaboration with Trent University or another organization, and would involve soil sampling and the measurement of carbon in underground ecosystems. And finally, understanding carbon stocks is critical for climate-based conservation. And this is one of the biggest possible benefits to the Land Trust in measuring their carbon stocks. Furthermore, as I said before, having a good understanding of your carbon stocks can potentially lead to support from outside sources and enhanced achievement of your conservation mission as the HHLT. So just some final thoughts on this this CBR. I would like to thank my faculty supervisor, Dr. Olivia Carpino, for supporting me through this. Same with Frank Fuguli for coordinating this project. And I'd like to give a very big thank you to the Haliburton Highland Land Trust for making this possible. And the biggest takeaway from this is that to properly conserve your ecosystems, you must first fully understand them. So we should seek to do that to support our conservation into the future. Thank you. Any questions?
And we'll have time for 2 questions, but feel free to visit Sam as both through today.
I don't want to steer us away from this. So they're greening cities all around the world, a lot of emphasis on obviously increasing green in cities. Did you come across any data looking at the carbon stock or holding carbon in, for example, greens on the side of high-rises or putting green spaces on roofs, et cetera, in cities? Was that something you looked at all? I don't want to steer us away from this project.
No, that's quite okay. So the way that a carbon stock assessment works is you take satellite data of a region, and that satellite data indicates to you what type of environment is in every part of that picture. Now, every ecosystem generally has an amount of stored carbon associated with it that researchers go out and test beforehand. I did not look into the carbon storage of urban greenery. I do have some notes on the carbon storage of lawns, which can actually get incredibly high at an 80-year maturity. But undoubtedly, the greening of cities, the adding of above-ground biomatter like plants, and the soil carbon that they support will be a very positive step in removing carbon from the atmosphere. Yes.
It seems like the end goal is to conserve what you have, right? How do you enhance it?
So everything, if you conserve a property that has been disturbed, if you have agricultural fields that maybe goes back to nature, then carbon stock assessments can be an excellent way of tracking that process. Old growth forests, for example, have a far higher stored carbon than new growth forests. So you can actually go back to a property year after year after year and repeat carbon stock assessments on it. Those might be better done in person, in the field. And it's an excellent way of tracking your conservation progress, and it can actually be a good way of communicating your efforts to the public.
One more thing, I think the trust is trying to enlarge its footprint.
The Land Trust is open to seeking, new properties to acquire. It's slow going, but steady. Thank you.
Yes, real good opportunity for both expanding the research opportunity in Haliburton County. Haliburton County is really a big science experiment welcoming Trent University to come. We have connections with all the lake associations, with the local municipal governments, the Haliburton government, and very welcoming in terms of coming, looking at the environment, looking at opportunities to do research and to do those projects that connect the students with real life issues.
Yeah.
So that's part of the welcoming part of Haliburton County.
A little shorter than Andy. Okay. So thank you everyone for being here and for having me here today. It's really nice to be back up in Haliburton. Can everyone hear me okay? Particularly to celebrate all of our wonderful students' research projects. So I'm kind of taking a broad approach to this talk today. I'm a trained soil microbial ecologist, but everyone can kind of take a breath. I'm not going to be showing you a whole bunch of data or really talking about soil microbes at all. What I'm going to be talking about is how we can view agriculture as a way to connect humans and the environment, and that by giving people, whether it be students or patients, the chance to interact with the environment through getting their hands dirty and learning in the environment, that we can affect change both within individuals, and this can also lead to changes in communities and increase community wellness. So, I didn't do this. There we go. Okay, there's the title slide. So thank you, Andy, for the introduction. Just so everyone's kind of knows me a little bit more, aside from my qualifications, I was pretty lucky as a child and youth to have a lot of really formative, meaningful experiences, both in natural and environmental agricultural landscapes. So I was a long-standing member of the Girl Guides of Canada. My parents were really avid hikers and campers. We went on a lot of the free Ontario farm tours. My parents liked, cheap kind of entertainment out in the environment. And this led me to joining the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps in my early 20s and working as a crew leader, and then pursuing education in environmental sciences as well. And so it wasn't until I really came to Trent, all of my training's been in, the natural sciences, that I began to better appreciate the need for a transdisciplinary lens when we're approaching challenges within our agri-food system. So when we talk about transdisciplinary approaches, we're really talking about working both across disciplines but also with non-academic stakeholders, so people like our community members, to try and address important societal challenges. So for those of you who aren't aware, there are many crises ongoing in our current agricultural system. So our modern conventional system is largely based at an industrial scale. It requires a lot of off-farm inputs that are largely based on fossil fuel energy to keep up those kind of levels of productivity. And so we've had a lot of negative repercussions from the current state of our agricultural system. So we've had losses in soil and soil health, which is my main area of study. So for those of you who don't know, soil health is a term that refers to the continued capacity of a soil to function as a living system and support life forms. So declines in soil health, declines in soil carbon and organic matter, losses in biodiversity due to large landscape homogenization, impacts on air and water quality, a whole slew of different environmental problems. And that's not even taking into account all of the issues we see from how our current agri-food system is structured and our social dimensions. So looking at things like power inequities, labor issues, succession planning, pressures on agricultural lands from development. So we have this whole myriad of challenges. So it can kind of seem like, what's the point, kind of defeatist. I know Laura was mentioning, one of our students today, that sometimes being in environmental sciences can get pretty depressing when you hear all the kind of the doom and gloom. So she has to get out and go for a walk and enjoy the natural environment as she should, to kind of push that off. So we have a lot of problems in our system, and one of the responses to these different challenges is the term sustainable agriculture. So when you think of the term sustainable agriculture, it's kind of like an umbrella term that can be used for a whole bunch of different production styles and practices. So this can be applied to different organic approaches, regenerative and agroecological methods, using different integrated nutrient management or pest management options. Basically, it's a non-exclusionary approach to agriculture, so we never cut out any tool from a farmer's toolkit based on ideological grounds. But we do base our use of different practices on evidence. So regardless of the different practices we might use within a sustainable system, it's going to be an integrated system that has a site-specific application, so there's not one kind of silver bullet for all problems on all farms. We have different soils and climates and production systems in place. But regardless, these sustainable agriculture approaches will, in the long term, help produce food, fuel, and fiber, use resources efficiently while integrating biological cycles. So we try and use those kind of interactions on the farm between plants and microbes and soils instead of trying to use more off-farm inputs. We also need to sustain farms economically. If a farmer can't survive, we won't be having the farm for much longer. And then, of course, enhancing quality of life for everyone involved, as well as environmental quality. So it's, a big job to kind of take on, but basically what we're doing is we're trying to balance out that imbalance where we had a higher focus on economic productivity and profits, and try and balance some of those trade-offs and benefits between our different spheres of environment, social, and economic impacts. So instead of thinking of this as like, oh my gosh, the agri-food system's falling apart, there's so many problems, it's just overwhelming, what are we going to do? I'd like to kind of leave you with some of the opportunities that we have. So we have the opportunity to use agriculture as a way to try and reconnect humans with the environment. So it's kind of like the low-hanging fruit, the easy-to-see way that we can connect humans back to environment and hopefully allow them, provide different opportunities for people to get their hands dirty, learning about and working within, whether it be agricultural or natural systems, often helps us, put theory and put practice into action. It allows people to kind of have increased feelings of kinship with the environment. And this can often lead to transformative changes in thinking in our students, which can then lead to different actions and changes in communities. And then the other big message that's kind of direct and indirect within this talk is that sustainable agricultural systems can help contribute to community well-being. And I would argue this occurs through many different routes. One of the most obvious in my main area of study, again in soils, is that if we improve soil health, we improve soil food security, which can help increase the health and well-being of communities. But we've also seen that working in the dirt, in the soil, can improve mood, feelings of social inclusion, as we're often working together to do things like weeding and pruning. So we can also kind of build this community of place and purpose and practice that can help to increase inclusion and community well-being. So I'm not actually going to present a lot of research results today. So as I said, I'm a soil microbial ecologist, but today I'm talking a little bit more about social dimensions of our food system. But I did want to tell you a little bit overall about what we're doing at Trent, so you can kind of, hopefully go home and ruminate and think about ways that we can work together on some of these challenges that we have in our agri-food system. So our Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems program at Trent, has both a BA and a BSc option. So we have a huge diversity of courses that we offer, ranging from nutrient management and crop physiology and soil sciences, all the way to community food systems, farm business management, agri-food policy. So we have a wide variety of courses. Regardless of the course, though, we have the same kind of focus, which is on critical thinking and experiential learning particularly. So we provide a whole bunch of different formal and informal experiential learning activities. And when we talk about experiential learning, which I've got to say, everyone who did all of the introductions this morning, you guys all hit on like a whole bunch of things I'm talking about, so that was a great kind of mini introduction. But so for experiential learning to work, basically students take what they learn in the classroom, apply it in the real world in kind of like a de-risked, safe setting, so they're not going to like lose the farm if they go out and their plan or their idea doesn't work. But a critical component of experiential learning is also reflection. So then they reflect on this activity that they've done out in the real world, and this can really lead to changes in how students see themselves and their positionality in the environment and how they interact with environmental components. So some pictures here. We go on a lot of farm tours and field trips. We have professional practitioners come in to do demos of new technologies. So you can see this large cover crop seeding drone here. We also embed in some of our courses service learning components. So this is basically a required component for students as part of their grade in a course where we kind of use them as free labor, where we get them out onto campus growing spaces, and they usually have to work 8 to 10 hours over the course of a semester helping doing things like weeding and picking rocks. And it's always so interesting to see their reflections, because I've seen many of them that are like, those 10 hours I spent picking rocks at the Trent Market Garden were the best 10 hours of my semester. I learned so much. So these can be really formative experiences for our students, particularly those who have come from more, urban settings and maybe haven't had those experiences out in the environment. And we have a really unique campus food system that's been fueled by student activism over many decades, so a couple decades before I joined being faculty at Trent. So we have the Trent Market Garden that is part of our Sustainable Agriculture Food System Student Society that is now homed at the Trent Farm, which I'll be talking about momentarily. And then we also have the Trent Vegetable Garden which partners with the Seasoned Spoon, and they produce food in our rooftop garden shown here, as well as a field garden. That food goes into the Seasoned Spoon Cafe, which is our on-campus eatery. And I have a current PhD student who is kind of using Trent as a case study to examine the ecology of food learning and looking at both formal and informal experiential learning activities and how this impacts students ascribing their kind of sentiment and meaning to the place of Trent. So as Andy said, really exciting developments. So when I came to Trent, I came from a very privileged background, can't speak, coming from University of Alberta and University of Guelph and Western, where we had a lot of resources, a lot of staff, a lot of equipment and facilities. And when I got to Trent, there wasn't a lot there for us to start working with. We had access to a field, but that was kind of it. So it was a bit of a ramp up over years. But in 2024, we got approval to establish the Trent Farm Research Center. And so we envision the Trent Farm as being this kind of living, learning hub where we'll have community members, farmers and students kind of learning alongside one another. And we are really excited in our first growing season what we've started with. And you can see, most of this happened through help from our Board of Governors and generous alumni donors that provided us with money to build our first building at the farm, which is a drive shed. It saved us last summer. It has air conditioning in the lunchroom area, which was really important for students to cool off in the heat that we had. And we also were able to get some basic farming equipment. So in our first growing season this past year, we supported a number of different field-based research trials looking at using different regenerative and agroecological approaches to try and decrease greenhouse gas emissions, improve soil health, and improve crop production. So on the left up here is a drone aerial shot from our diversified cover crop trial, where we looked at different mixtures of cover crops and how they impact the retention of soil carbon. And then we also had a project looking at novel fertilizer formulations to try and decrease nitrogen losses from our systems. And we also had a project looking at peri-urban agriculture, which is this middle picture here. And so these dome-looking things in the field, that's called a greenhouse gas flux chamber. So we're actually measuring the greenhouse gas fluxes coming out of these systems. So a lot of really interesting work, and our grad students in general, love getting out to the field. So having the farm there to support their research is wonderful, particularly because students, can decide to jump out with a friend to go help with soil sampling and then get back to doing data analysis later in the afternoon on campus. So another component that's really important to us at the farm is having students have some decision making and autonomy in what they're working on. So we don't, tend to just come in and dictate exactly what they're doing. So this past summer, we had a bunch of undergrad students who had some interesting kind of micro projects that they wanted to work on. So we supported them in these. So we started a small pollinator garden, a small food forest, and a strawberry patch for pick your own strawberries for students, as well as establishing a First Nations gathering area. We also grew hops for Atana beer, which is served in the Cayley pub on campus. And our students got really excited about growing some different fruit and veg, which you can see we cleaned up at the Norwood and the Bracebridge Fall Fairs. We won a lot of ribbons. Logan was really proud of the work we've done over the summer. And so it's always great to see kind of, as students develop and take on leadership in this way. Another really important aspect of what we're doing at the farm is community engagement. So we have things like open houses and demo days. We invite high school classes out, 4-H groups. But one of the things is they don't just come and be an active participant at the farm. We put them to work. So it's always interesting to see the younger students kind of like buzzing in excitement over, like how big was the kale that you got, or, chatting to each other on the way off the farm. And it's really important too to have this connection to community, because if we are operating in a silo, we're not going to be addressing and answering research questions that are relevant to our regional producers. So we have a lot of different community connections. Our Trent Farm also has an advisory board where we have community members on the board. We meet twice a year, and they give us some input on our vision and activities. So if anyone is interested in being part of our board, please reach out to me. And these partnerships are really important, both for the farm as well as our community research projects, and ongoing relations with other faculty in TSC as well. And one of our first kind of community research projects that we did last year was with Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario. And so our students again, drove and spearheaded this, where they wanted to apply into the farmer-led research program. And I found out we're the first university to have ever participated in the EFAO farmer-led research program, so I'm proud of us for doing that. And so we supported 3 different projects, one looking at trellising management of loofahs. So if anyone's never seen a loofah, that green thing, that's a very small one. Logan grew some really big loofahs. So that's like what you would use to scrub yourself in the shower. So that's what it looks like when it's growing. So we looked at trellising of loofahs, we looked at no-till potato production using sheep wool as a mulch, and we also participated in a landrace squash variety trial. So a lot of really interesting work that we're trying to do to kind of, build those community connections and make sure that we're focusing on research that's relevant to our local producers. So I only have a couple slides left. I know I've talked a lot already. But I just wanted to highlight 2 projects that I am currently working on that I think are relevant to the audience here. So the first is my first Master's of Sustainability student, Samuel Dua. When he was with me, we worked in collaboration with Abbey Gardens. He received the Patterson Fellowship, and he was working on trying to do some improvements in compost mixtures and some outreach. Unfortunately, it was sometime around when COVID hit, so the project kind of changed direction. So what we did instead was we wanted to help Abbey Gardens assess whether there was a want and a need for a centralized composting facility housed at Abbey Gardens. So Samuel put out an online survey through the Dysart et al. Municipality, and we had 193 respondents. So I'm not sure if any of you remember doing a survey about composting at Abbey Gardens, but if you did that, thank you for participating. Of our respondents, 72% were year-round and 28% were seasonal residents. So there was a bit of a divide in the responses that we saw in the kind of emerging themes based on resident status. Of these, 56% reported composting, while 40% reported that they did not compost at home. And what we found was that one of the most significant drivers of composting behavior was prior knowledge of composting. So if there was intergenerational learning and prior knowledge about the benefits of composting and about the benefits of diverting food waste from the landfill, participants were more likely to report that they composted at home. We also saw that when participants ascribed sentiment and meaning to the environment, this increased their ethical commitment to protecting the environment. So again, this idea that if we get people out learning and working in the environment and increasing their knowledge, then they're more likely to make positive behaviors that will affect change at the community level. And then the final project I wanted to talk about, which Andy alluded to in the introductions this morning, is a really exciting project that has a lot of relevance to this community as well. So this study is led by Sharon Castellanen out of McMaster University, and she called me up a couple years ago. She's a prof of nursing, and she was telling me about this model system from the Netherlands called the Green Care Farms. And so basically what it is a model of dementia care where people living with dementia either live on farm or they might have a daycare program or they're brought onto farm to work with their hands in the garden, get to interact with animals. This helps them, reconnect to old skills and old memories, helps improve their mobility and therefore increase their quality of life at later years. And it has huge success in the Netherlands. There are over 2,000 of these facilities. They look, different and unique and individual, each one that we visited. So these pictures here we visited in 2024, and we got to tour some of these different Green Care Farm facilities. So Sharon's working on a big stakeholder analysis looking at barriers and challenges to implementing this kind of a model here in Canada. My component of this is the agricultural side. So when Sharon called me up, I think actually she said, I've tried a couple people at Guelph and no one will get back to me. I was really interested in this because I have dementia on both sides of my family. And when we think about the principles we operate on in our sustainable agriculture education, in those principles of experiential learning, I could see how those same principles would have a lot of value to dementia care patients. So again, with my PhD student Emma, we are exploring how farmers might be involved in building and operating green care farm systems here in Canada. And so Emma has been conducting interviews. She's still in the process of this, so it's still early stages, but we have seen some emerging themes come from her interviews. So she's interviewing farmers and farmland operators to try and identify, again, some of those different barriers and opportunities and challenges that we might have in operating and implementing a green care farm system. So many farmers noted that farms and nature are seen as therapeutic and memory activating spaces, with one respondent saying reconnecting with the farm can bring back memories, connections, and fire circuits in the brain in ways sitting in a nursing home watching television will not. We also saw farming often contextualized as care, as craft, and as a calling, but with structural precarity. So, not likely to be pursuing farming for a love of money, but for many other reasons that are potentially less valued at times. And then finally, we saw that care can be also contextualized as a collective benefit. So the idea of these green care farm homes would not only benefit individual dementia, persons living with dementia or dementia caregivers, but also the broader community by relieving stress on individuals. So care goes both ways. Supporting caregivers and families matters just as much. So to leave you with some these basic messages again, we can restore human-environment connections through agriculture if we provide opportunities for people and community members and students or care patients to get their hands dirty and learn about the environment. We're more likely to affect change in their behaviors and their engagement with community action. And then overall, sustainable agriculture contributes to community well-being, both through contributions to food security, but also by providing, this kind of community of place and purpose and practice where people can come together and work outdoors towards common problems. So if anyone would like to talk more about soils or learn more about the farm or anything else, I have a whole slew of other projects not related to what I talked about here today. We will have an open house day in August for community members and farmers. So last year we had one that was kind of geared towards alumni. This year we're going to have one for community members and farmers. It will probably be the first or second week of August after the holiday. So if you're able, I really encourage you to keep an eye out for that and come visit us at the farm this summer. So thank you.
learning a lot about being part of a community-based research. I feel like it's a lot different when you have like a lot of funding and stuff like that. It's more commercialized. I feel like when you're doing it for a community and you know that this research is actually going to be used to help like people of a small community who actually care about their environment, it's really motivating me to continue to do the research and do the research that I did. And honestly, the favorite part I had for this research project was to get to know the area, get to know all the diverse ecosystems in the Haliburton Highlands and like how I could really help the species here and make a difference.
Hello everybody. It's my first time on the podium. It's a little scary up here. Okay. Got to go forward? Okay. So today I'll be talking about how we can use velocity of climate change to select new protection areas in Haliburton Highlands. My name is Javed Bentley. My supervisor for this project was Dr. Dave Beresford, and this is a community-based research project in association with ULinks, Trent University, and the Haliburton Highlands. So a little bit about me. I'm a fourth-year biology student at Trent University. Throughout my undergrad, I've gained quite a lot of experience and skills in biology that helped me tackle biological issues and problems. And the reason why I chose this project is I really wanted to expand and enhance my research ability while also doing really meaningful research with real world implications. And I hope to continue to do conservation work research in the future. So a little bit of background. I think you're all heard of climate change before and how much climate change is affecting ecosystems all around the world. But you may not be so sure about which areas are being affected at a quicker rate or a slower rate than others. This, hence, velocity of climate change. So this study is based off of a Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry study that assessed velocity of climate change in areas around Ontario. And my job was to evaluate this study and see how applicable it was for the Haliburton Highlands Land Trust. So just to reiterate the research questions going into the project. The first one was, is the implementation of the MNR framework suitable for the land trust? What were the results of the MNR study and how will they be useful in the Haliburton Highlands? And what is a possible prototype that can be used in the Haliburton Highlands and how will this affect their species? So just to go over a couple of key terms I'm going to use during this presentation. So what is velocity of climate change? Velocity of climate change is the instantaneous rate of at which climate change conditions are changing in a given area. And so this is calculated by dividing the change in temperature over time by the change in temperature over a distance. And this gives you a distance over time, or a velocity. It could also be seen as how fast a species needs to move to stay within its climatic niche. Now, there's two main units used to calculate velocity of climate change. This is MAT and GGD5. So MAT is the mean annual air temperature, so how much the air temperature changes on a yearly basis. And GGD5 is the growing degree days over 5. And it's a measure of how fast crops and insects grow in terms of temperature. The last term I'll be using quite often is refugia. And these are areas that are less impacted by climate change. It would be a very suitable habitat for vulnerable species. So let's get into what the study is. So the methodology of the study is velocity of climate change is mapped out over 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer resolution grids over a large area. As you can see in the graphic here, this every square has a different value for the velocity of climate change. And we can see that there's large red spots, and this is what we call hot spots. And this is the areas where velocity of climate change is the fastest, so climate conditions are changing the fastest. And these are areas that you don't really want to put in a protection area. You want to go and tend towards the yellow and green areas, which we call cold spots. And these are the areas where velocity of climate change is much lower, and thus the climate conditions are changing much less and be a much more suitable habitat for climate-affected species. So what were the results of the study? So the results of the study were that in the Haliburton Highlands, the most northern parts around the Algonquin had a much higher velocity of climate change compared to the southern parts around where we are now in Haliburton and Midden, had much lower velocity of climate change. And the box plot here shows how the different, I don't think you can see the ecosystems, but how the different ecosystems were affected or what their velocity of climate change output was. So we see that marshes, fens, and swamps, along with coniferous forests, were the lowest velocity of climate change ecosystems. Now, how can all this data help us save vulnerable species in Haliburton? So I'm going to go over 3 examples of species being affected in Haliburton by climate, and then I'll go over how we can use this data to help these species. So the first is the black ash tree. I'm sure you're all familiar with the black ash tree and how it's been devastated by the emerald ash borer. But for those who don't, the emerald ash borer is a boring beetle that deposits its eggs within the ash tree, and then once the larvae hatch, they eat out the internals of the tree, killing the tree. Now, with the increasing temperature, this has expanded the range and the longevity of the emerald ash borer, and this has resulted in a decline of 70% of the black ash in the last 3 generations. The second species I want to talk about is the Canada jay. The Canada jay is a scatter hoarder, which means they cache their food in spruce trees all around their territory. But unfortunately, due to all the flash heat events, which I'm sure you are all familiar with, it gets hot and cold all winter, a lot of this food has spoiled by the time it's spring, and the jay has nothing to feed its young come springtime. And this has led to a 50% decline of Canada jay in the Algonquin region. So the last species I'm going to talk about is the western chorus frog. Now, the western chorus frog requires small pools of water where they can lay their eggs and for their tadpoles to grow for several months. But with global warming, a lot of these pools of water have dried up, resulting in no tadpoles surviving, and this has led to a 30% decline of the western chorus frog in just the last decade. So, how can we use velocity of climate change to help these species? Well, by using the spatial and ecosystem data, we can find the most suitable habitats for these species. So, if you guys remember, deciduous swamps are one of the lowest velocity of climate change areas. And so, choosing a deciduous swamp in the lower parts of the Haliburton Highlands, these would be a great suitable habitat for species like the western chorus frog, which I just discussed, needs these small pools of water to reproduce, and the black ash tree, who tend to thrive in wetlands. So a great example of this is the Fred and Pearl Berry Wetland Reserve, which would make a great refugia for these 2 species. If you also remember, I talked about coniferous forests being on the low spectrum of velocity of climate change, and the Canada jay requires this as their critical habitat. So this would also be a great refugia for the Canada jay. And a great example of this is the Dow Forest, which is also a property owned by the Land Trust and can be used as a refugia for the Canada jay. So some limitations of the study is that velocity of climate change is based purely off of projected emissions of over 50 years, which may not always be the most accurate over time. Also, it only considers temperature, and many other species are affected by climate change in other ways other than temperature, such as drought, melting ice, unpredictable rain, and flooding. So my recommendations for the Land Trust is I think that the velocity of climate change is a great asset and should be used to make effective conservation plans with the use of other great metrics to fill in research gaps. I think too that the velocity of climate change could be a great for their acquiring property. So if they want to acquire an area for a refugia, they look for cold spots. If they want to acquire area for restoration efforts, they could look at some potential hotspots. And I think the last thing is that the study for velocity of climate change should continue and expand, in that the Land Trust should potentially look into ways that they can include this into understanding watersheds and hydrology. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say that going forward, I think it's important that the organizations like the Land Trust continue to use new scientific methods to tackle this ever-evolving climate change crisis. Thank you.
Okay, we've got time for 2 questions.
You mentioned the velocity of climate change.
Yep.
What is the accuracy of the basis of the data? Because you say it's pretty broad scale. So is this something that's 10% valid, or is it 50% valid?
So I myself never ran the statistics to see how accurate the velocity of climate change data was, but a study by the government seemed to say that it was pretty useful. Like, I don't know if it's a great, amazing to say like this 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer space right here is the most affected by climate change in the area. But for general considerations, it's pretty effective for saying, this area here is more affected by climate change than this area here in a more broader scale. Maybe not so much in very small, like very precise areas.
Cool.
So in looking at your picture, basically of Haliburton County, showing where the hot spots were,
Yeah.
is it possible to take into consideration the fact that that's the upper end of the watershed? And so the further down the watershed you go, those lake levels up in Knies Lake and Redstone and everything are more affected by the Trent Severn waterway, who do drawdowns on our water table. So your greener, more the colder spots are actually lower in that water chain, and so the whole Trent Severn water system may be affecting that data.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that, as I said, I tried to mention, is that I think a great extension of this project was to see how hydrology and the watersheds in the Haliburton County are affected and how they affect the velocity of climate change. From what I saw, in terms of the Haliburton Highlands, that elevation was the biggest deciding factor in terms of velocity of climate change. So obviously by the northern part, Algonquin had a much higher velocity than where we are here in the lower elevations. But I think that it would be great to maybe do an extension of this project for future researchers or community-based researchers to understand how, as you said, different watersheds are affected or how they may affect velocity of climate change. Thank you.
My name is Tristan Schinkel. I'm a fourth-year environmental science and studies major at Trent University. I originally reached out to Frank Faguli, project coordinator at ULinks, who set me up as a community-based research project with Abbey Gardens, assessing how soil compaction and organic matter change with distance and depth from trails at their property. After reaching out with Dr. Catherine Eimers, this project became my honors thesis for my degree. The biggest pro that I'd say from this opportunity would be that I always wanted to be able to take the theoretical from university and apply it to something hands-on and get that hands-on experience for work. And there's no better opportunity than to do that and help your local community.
Hello everybody, my name is Tristan Schinkel and I am a fourth-year environmental science and studies major at Trent University. Before we begin, I'd like to start by thanking Abbey Gardens, and more specifically Kara Steele, a restoration ecologist at Abbey Gardens, who allowed me to go on their property and conduct the research that I'll be presenting to you today. Outside of that, this began as a community-based research project with the help of Frank Faguli, and then through reaching out to Dr. Catherine Eimers, this project slowly became my honors thesis for my degree. As for the background context of this research, Abbey Gardens is a former aggregate gravel pit which has been actively restored since 2009. People can now come to their property to walk the trails, explore, and connect with nature. But this brings up an extremely important question. Can the trails that they've built impact the ecosystems which they are trying to restore? Now, this matters at an extremely large scale, as across Canada there's over 278,000 kilometers of recreational trails, with about 1/3 of these being used for things like hiking and biking. So when I talk about the impacts of trails, this has the potential to scale all across Canada. Now, what are the impacts? Well, trails have the potential to change the environment right beside them. This means things like soil compaction, which limits root infiltration and water infiltration into the soil. It also reduces soil organic matter, which impacts nutrient availability and the overall soil health. And third of all, it can impact and change the vegetation that you see nearby trails. Understanding this, the goal of my research was to assess how soil and vegetation change with distance, depth, and trail use intensity. Now, there is over 8,000 abandoned aggregate pits scattered all across Ontario, with many of which being restored in similar ways to Abbey Gardens. Abbey Gardens is a community-driven project where restoration, education, and recreation all occur in the same space. So this means things like their newly implemented disc golf course or their trails were built to intentionally drive people to their property. This also means that monitoring becomes extremely important, not only to understand if impacts are happening, but to understand where and how far they extend into the forest. So, the question I focused on was how soil compaction and organic matter change with distance away from these trails at Abbey Gardens. I then compared that to a more established and frequently used site at Trent University. So, I had some few expectations going into this study. The first one was that soil compaction right next to trails would increase, and then that would be simply due to repeated foot traffic, and that would decrease as you move further into the forest. Second, consider soil organic matter as the living and decomposing material within the soil, such as the leaves and roots, which provide nutrients to the soil. I expected this to be lower near the trails and gradually increase as you move further into the forest. Third, vegetation was established in order to set up a baseline for future monitoring at Abbey Gardens with the construction of some permanent sample plots. But you would typically expect reduced plant cover and fewer sensitive species, such as native ferns, inside of these areas, simply due to the reduction in canopy cover that the deciduous forests provide them. So, how did I actually test this? Well, I studied across two different sites. The first was an inferred low-use site, which was Abbey Gardens in Haliburton, Ontario. The second was an inferred high-use site at Trent University called the South Drumlin Nature Area. And this was chosen due to its close connection to the Rotary Greenway Trail, which is an extensively used trail system all across Peterborough that is used for commuting. As to remain true to my study, both sites were inside of deciduous forests, with the Abbey Gardens site being located inside of a sugar maple basswood forest, and the Trent University site being located inside of a mixed deciduous. In total, I collected 78 soil samples, with 54 from Trent University or 54 from Abbey Gardens and 24 from Trent University, in order to, with more from Abbey Gardens to better support the community-based research side of this project. So, how did I actually test this? Well, I started by setting up 10 transects total across both Abbey Gardens and Trent University in order to measure changes with depth and soil distance from these trails. I collected samples at 0, 1, 5, 10, and 20 meters from the trail, and then went back and subsequently sampled at 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 meters to better understand those changes near trails. I also sampled the upper soil horizon and the lower mineral soil in order to better understand changes with depth. In order to actually measure these things, for soil compaction, I used a method called bulk density, which tells you how tightly packed the soil is together. For soil organic matter, I used a method called loss on ignition, which tells you how much of the organic matter was lost after igniting the soil. And then additionally, as you can see in the black on the figure, I dug a soil pit at Abbey Gardens to better characterize the soil, with it being characterized as an early stage Brunasol with some early stage transition in the A horizon with some alluviation going into the B. Additionally, as I said, I constructed those two permanent sample plots to better assess future vegetation monitoring at Abbey Gardens. Now, these are the results, and I don't expect you to understand a thing you were looking at here. But if you look at the top left, to summarize, that shows soil compaction over distance, bulk density. And we can see that from the trail at 0 meters out to about 10 meters, there's absolutely no significant change. And then beyond that point, you see a significant decrease at 20 meters into the forest. For the bottom, that shows soil organic matter over distance, and we see the opposite trend, with lower organic matter near the trail, with it gradually increasing into the forest, with a statistically significant difference at that 10 meter to 20 meter mark. As for the right figure, this shows bulk density on the top and soil organic matter on the bottom, with Trent University in orange and Abbey Gardens in green. It shows changes between the two horizons, the A and B, the upper and lower, and compares that between the 0 and 10 meter samples. So to summarize this, the differences between Abbey Gardens and Trent University were considered statistically insignificant, with most of the impacts being seen in the surface soil, and all the impacts going up into that 10 meter point. So what does this actually mean? Well, at Abbey Gardens, soil organic matter was considered relatively high, while soil compaction was considered relatively low, even though we could measure it out to that 10 meter point. But these results were not indicative of severe soil disturbance at Abbey Gardens, and most likely mimicked natural site conditions, as it is a newly established system and is a former aggregate gravel pit, so you might see some differences between these soil horizons. Additionally, we also might be able to characterize this 10-meter extension off the trail by off-trail movement, where individuals may step off the trail to either pass others, avoid unfavorable conditions, or simply to explore nature. And that can push these trail impacts beyond that trail edge up to that 10-meter point. But overall, from an Abbey Gardens perspective, my results are an extremely positive outlook, and as long as they continue monitoring in the future, I see no issues with their trail systems being in place. But there was some limitations to my study that I would like to mention. First of all, trail use intensity was inferred, which is probably why we didn't see any significant differences between that Abbey Gardens and the Trent University site. And second of all, there was seasonal limitations with me sampling in the fall, which didn't allow me to sample canopy cover, as well as the impacts on trails on understory vegetation, which is a very important link as you can see more invasive species in your trails. But to summarize, trail impacts were present at Abbey Gardens, but not considered statistically significant, and were within that first 10 meters of the trail edge, which means that restoration and recreation are able to coexist at Abbey Gardens as long as they continue that future monitoring. But my advice to them would be to minimize off-trail movement in order to prevent the spread of impacts from moving further beyond that 10-meter point, simply by maybe implementing some signage or some boundaries to prevent people from stepping off. But for the audience, next time you are on a trail, it might be very tempting to step off for that quick shortcut, but those few footsteps can add up over time, so sticking to the trail can make a much bigger difference than you once thought. Thank you so much. Any groundbreaking questions?
Your study was very interesting and specific. Could you speculate on any other impacts that people or animals veering off the trail may have?
So one that I wasn't able to assess directly, which, as I said, was that vegetation understory. Typically, you'd see a lot of invasive species near those trail edges because say before you enter a trail system, you're walking, those seedlings get stuck in your boots, or if you're biking, they get stuck in the tread of your bike. And then as you move up the trail, those will eventually fall off, end up on the edges of those trails, and now you've just officially allowed an invasive species into this native ecosystem.
Hi, great talk.
Thank you.
So as someone who spent a lot of time in my 20s building and maintaining trails, I appreciate the main message of stay on the darn trail. I just wanted to know, when you looked at your organic and then your mineral soil layers, did you notice like a difference in the actual depth of the organic layer as you moved up from the trail, or no?
Now, I didn't specifically measure the depth at each of these horizons, so I wasn't, whenever I took the bulk density samples, I didn't specifically measure how deep that organic horizon was or how deep that mineral soil was. It was the first 10 centimeters of both the A and the B that I sampled from, but I don't know how deep those would extend. But you would typically expect surface organic matter, so that organic horizon, to be reduced nearest to the trail.
I have
One last question.
Do you think dog poop might be a bigger impact than trail compaction?
It might, not only for us stepping on it, but for the phosphorus and other things they put into the soil. Not that I think of. Thank you.
I'm so excited to have been able to co-host one of the presentations this year. Two amazing students from Trent, Florence and Lenore, snapped up the biodigester project that we had submitted as a potential research project. And they've done a lot of research, and they will be presenting. They've got their poster, and they'll be doing a presentation here today about the feasibility of putting a biodigester into Haliburton County.
Thanks. Oh. Go back. There you go. Thanks. No worries.
Hello, everyone. My name's Lenore Reed.
And I'm Florence Bergeron.
Today in our presentation, Flo and I will be discussing the feasibility of biodigested in Haliburton County. For this community-based research project, we have worked with Frank Faguli from ULinks, along with community member Susan Hay with Environment Haliburton, Dr. Nell Thomas from Haliburton County Food Alliance. You can go. So for Environment Halliburton. Environment Halliburton is a local nonprofit established in Halliburton County in 2003. Their objectives include to advocate for and support others who are advocating for environmental protection and conservation, and to distribute educational materials and information throughout the county on environmental issues and concerns. The Halliburton County Food Alliance is a community group whose goals focus on reducing food waste, ensuring a dependable food supply, and stockpile of community reserves, as well as food provisions for all in Halliburton County and surrounding communities. Creating a circular economy through farm-to-table practices and a community food plan has been drafted to include transportation of food from farms to grocery stores, restaurants, and food banks. So biodigestion, sorry, go ahead.
With such values and priorities, Environment Halliburton and Halliburton County Food Alliance wish to look into potential avenues for food waste management, including waste to energy, which brought us to this research question. What are the benefits, opportunities, and challenges with establishing a biodigester in Halliburton County? We embarked on this research by reviewing the literature on biodigesters in Canada by using web search engines, scientific article databases, and article linking websites. The keywords used were biodigester, Canada, biogas, and small scale. We made sure to review articles that were frequently cited to inform ourselves on this topic. We focused mostly on peer review articles as well as government and not-for-profit reports. We also reached out to multiple companies and experts in food waste, biodigesters, and municipal policies to survey them, which allowed us to have a few phone calls, but not as many as we wish we could have.
So biodigestion for the community. A biodigester is a closed system that biologically digests organic material anaerobically, so without oxygen. The biogas accumulated in the biodigester can be used for the same purposes as natural gas, such as generate energy, provide heating, power vehicles, and produce fuel for cooking. It also reduces reliance on non-renewable energy. Biogas is renewable and natural gas is non-renewable. For this municipal biodigester concept, a greenhouse geodesic dome prototype would be attached to the biodigester as a direct energy recipient for enhanced four-season growing of produce. A biodigester and greenhouse in a central location of the county would be ideal, where people can drop off their organic waste, and larger distributors contributing to this would be hospitals and schools, who could then also receive produce from the greenhouse.
So why choose a biodigester? A biodigester in a county of Halliburton could participate in reducing the county's emissions, 77% of which came from decaying waste in landfills in 2018. Biodigesters do not emit greenhouse gas like landfills and incinerators do. Moreover, a biodigester could reduce the community's reliance on the grid for electricity and on global supply food chains for food and fuel.
So I know I touched on it earlier, but I'll explain in more detail. So an anaerobic biodigester are sealed systems that use microorganisms to break down organic matter, such as manure and food waste, with the absence of oxygen. The gas created in this closed vessel is nitrogen-rich biogas for energy and digestate that gathers on the bottom of the biodigester, which can be used for fertilizer. Biodigesters offer a waste management solution and renewable energy source. So biodigesters in Canada. Biodigesters are a growing industry in Canada, with almost 300 recorded in 2021. Biogas production has begun to replace traditional disposable methods in Canada thanks to new policies supporting renewable natural gas production from organic waste. Several anaerobic digestion facilities exist all throughout Ontario, including water resource recovery facilities, which is something used in Peterborough, standalone digesters, and on-farm digesters. The cost of a small-scale biodigester starts around $5 million. An advancement of the biogas industry in Canada relies on provincial energy and waste management policies. There's a biodigester that's very successful in Lakefield at Maryland Farms, which they have 600 animals there, and it heats their home and all farm buildings, along with selling the rest of it back to the grid for energy for 16 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a really great rate.
So overall, there are still some opportunities for the county, with some federal and provincial grants existing for biodigesters for municipalities or entrepreneurs. Many of those grants will cover either the design, the installation, operations, and sometimes even up to the maintenance of the biodigester. Each of those steps could bring about some local jobs, and a well-running biodigester would overall improve the waste management in the county. However, there are substantial challenges because implementing a biodigester would mean a big upfront cost that is actually way higher than that of other renewable sources, but other renewable sources do not reduce necessarily the food waste's impact in your landfills. Similarly, staffing would be required to supervise food waste deposits at the biodigester to prevent plastics or other undesirable items from being put in it. Moreover, colder climates reduce the anaerobic digestion efficiency, which reduces the energy production rate over winter. Another challenge is with current technologies being more adequate for regular, frequent, and large inputs, which is why the farm that was mentioned earlier works so well. Overall, the future of Haliburton County's diversion of organic waste from landfills to energy will depend on technological advances, substantial funding opportunities, and community preferences. Thankfully, the inevitable rise in popularity in greenhouses across the county will create great opportunities for all. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that. We looked at a biodigester years ago for Abbey Gardens, and one of the drawbacks was the volume of material that was required to keep it going. And so, can you comment on that?
Yes, I would love to. So right now, the most affordable biodigesters would not fit the community's needs in terms of food waste. However, there are prototypes around Canada that are being implemented in smaller and smaller and smaller communities over the years, with one in Yukon that I'm keeping a personal eye on. I think I'm part of their newsletter updates. So it is closer to the food waste amount. Right now, yeah, that's all I'm going to say. So not perfect, but keeping an eye out is a hopeful practice.
Hi, so I was wondering if you could comment on the more social cultural impact, as in, is it gonna stink real bad?
No, because it's super closed. Like, it is extremely, the methane cannot escape in any way because we want it for the energy, and I'll let you comment.
Thank you. I was just going to say too, it's a good alternative for compost in rural areas like this, only because it doesn't attract animals. So that's why this is such a good alternative as well for that.
Oh my God, wouldn't that be nice? Yes. Yeah, so it would reduce the current emissions that are happening in landfills across the county. So as you saw earlier, 77% of the 15,000 tons that are emitted, not just of methane, of all greenhouse gases, a lot of which are methane from the landfills, would thus be greatly reduced, with at least 50% of them if all food waste were to go in a biodigester, which means that it would be 6,000 tons that would not be emitted if food waste was put not in a landfill.
One more, quickly, please. One more? Okay.
Is there any great leap in this technology in the last 5 years? And is there any particular country that leads in this?
Leaps. Okay. Actually, Canada is starting to be a leader in this. I know for a fact that at least 4 municipalities across the country are using it for different things, with Quebec City actually officially using it for all of its food waste now. And because Canada has a great relationship with Scandinavian nations, we're able to follow their lead. So they were once the leaders, we're catching up slowly but surely. So yeah, and there have been great leaps as well in terms of the scale, as previously mentioned. So it used to be only feasible for more than a ton a day. Now we're able to do a ton a day. And then Yukon is trying their thing of, if I remember correctly, 400 kilogram a day. So it's reducing, but still producing some energy that we're able to use in different projects. Thank you.
Great talk. Thank you.